Mike, thank you very much for allowing me to come along and have a chat. So can you tell the world who you are and what's your connection to Norman Cornish?
Right, thanks David. My name is Mike Thornton. I'm married to Ann, Norman's daughter, and we've known each other since our sixth form days in the late 60s at Spennymoor, and recently we published a book which it actually has the front cover including the picture behind me at the moment.
That's the one there, isn't it? Okay.
It certainly is, yes. I'll just say a little bit about that.
Go on,
that is typical Norman Cornish. It's called Kids in Snow, Mount Pleasant.
Right.
And I look at that every day.
Yeah.
It's a lovely scene, and as someone once said, if Canaletto can open up the canals of the Grand Canal in Venice, Norman Cornish can open up the back streets of Spennymoor.
And doesn't he do it beautifully well?
Does it beautifully. That's one of his favourite paintings, actually.
Really?
A lot of years ago, I interviewed him just on tape, not with a camera.
Yeah.
But I said, come on, Norman, what are your 5 favourite pictures?
Right.
And this was one of them.
What is the title of that?
Kids in Snow, Mount Pleasant.
That's right. So Mount Pleasant, that will be very local.
It actually, Mount Pleasant is a name that's common throughout England, and it goes back to medieval times where the refuse in a village or a town was piled up on the outskirts, and of course known to the locals as Mount Pleasant.
I see.
And it was the opposite because it was stunk of all of the rubbish. So that was Mount Pleasant. Low Spennymoor. The church is gone. But as I say, I look at that every day, and there are over 40 characters in there, so typical of life in County Durham and lots of other parts of the UK during the 50s and 60s when we had proper winters.
Proper winters.
Winters. In fact, there's an essay in the book called Growing Up Inside the Picture, where the author, Keith Wilson, has written about his time in East Durham, and he remembered the winters exactly as they were in the picture. There's all sorts going on. There's parents holding on to the hands of children saying, no, you're not going to join in, or keep moving, or bring the bairn in because they'll get cold. And it's just full of life, and it's a little bit of social history about County Durham.
Well, it's a snapshot in time, in actual fact, isn't it?
It is.
Painted in which decade?
The decade he would paint it in the early 70s, but it was based on drawings from a much earlier period.
I see. Okay.
Because in 1967 they moved from the 2 up, 2 down colliery house they had in Bishop's Close Street, and he'd come out of mining, and he was looking for a much larger house to give him a proper studio space to develop as a professional artist, which he did for more years as a miner, actually, which is a point that's often overlooked.
I didn't know that, because he did continue mining even when he was a successful painter.
He did, yes. He was painting and working underground from the late 30s and during the 40s and so on. And things came to a head in 1966, where he was developing sore back. He'd had 33 years underground, and he couldn't go on, and simultaneously he'd been under pressure from the Stone Gallery in Newcastle to leave mining and concentrate on painting.
Now, was this because the Stone Gallery just needed more stock? They were selling his work so well that they just,
that would have been once. Well, yes, they would have. They realised that it was good for business, and they staged his exhibitions and acted as his agents. But they were also aware that he couldn't continue with his dual life of being a miner underground and trying to be an artist at the same time.
Now, Mike, you knew the man personally. Yeah. From what age did you meet him?
Well, I would be about 17 when I first met him. That was 1966.
Right.
Yeah. Ann and I were in the sixth form together at Spennymoor.
Okay.
So I was a regular visitor to the house.
So I want to get into Norman Cornish's personality in a moment with you, but let me ask you this question. I think it'll be a burning question for people watching this all over the world. Is this: he's a miner working underground. This is a hard job. And he's a successful painter as well. Why did he continue with mining? Why didn't he take the easy route and just become a highfalutin artist?
Because he was aware that he had a young family. Committing to becoming a professional artist was a big decision if that was going to be his sole income. And there was a fine balance between deriving an income from selling his work and having a basic income from the mine, and there was a great tension there.
Okay.
At what point do I take take the plunge?
Yeah.
And he reached a point in '66 where he'd already had the major commission for the county council with the mural.
Yeah.
Under pressure for more work to the gallery. His back was he was struggling with lower back syndrome. And his wife Sarah said, "Well, Norman, if you don't put your notice in, I will."
Lovely.
And from that, he made the decision then and realised that he needed a proper space to work in. And the family then found the space. Norman and Sarah found the space up at Whitworth Terrace, which is where they moved to in 1967, and they were there until the end in 2014.
But what about life down the mine? Norman must have spoken to you about what it was like down the mine. How were the miners treated? What was their lifestyle like?
Well, there's an expression that I've used in one of the sections of the book where he says we were treated like slaves and spoken to like convicts.
Unreal.
And conditions were very harsh. The wives and girlfriends and so on would perhaps wave goodbye to their husbands and boyfriends heading off for work and not knowing whether they were going to come back because of the frequency of accidents, some minor, some serious. And Dean and Chapter Colliery, where he worked, and he started as a 14-year-old in 1934, it was known locally as the butcher's shop because of the frequency of accidents. There was no major disaster where there are more than 16 killed on a single occasion, but there were accidents every week through stone fall or gas or whatever. So these were hazardous conditions, and men frequently injured. And even on his first day at work, which he started on Boxing Day 1934, at 3 o'clock in the morning, walked to work in the snow, to start his first session, and he was greeted by the man controlling the pit cage that you've just signed your life away, son.
Oh.
So that's your first day at work. And
what an introduction,
What an introduction, yes.
But that was normal. Would Norman have expected to have gone into the pit? Was his father in the pit?
There was an expectation that the sons of miners went underground. And it happened all over the north and other coal fields as well.
Yeah.
May have happened in the shipyards, I don't know. But that's how it was. And there were boys. They started as boys, became young men, and sadly they were denied the opportunity to continue their education in whichever direction it was to go. And even as a 14-year-old, there were friends of his mum and dad who said, "You've got to let Norman stay on at school because he's a clever boy. He needs the opportunity, he should be going into a professional career, etc., etc." But the pressure was on at the age of 14. As the oldest, he had 5 brothers and 1 sister. He was the oldest. "It's time to go to work, son," and you're starting at the Dean and Chapter Colliery.
And would that be to bring in money to the household?
That would be to bring in money to supplement the income of his father. His mother would just be there, seeing that there was a meal on the table and doing the washing, and that was the life of a miner's wife in those times.
I think anybody relatively young watching this now would find this very hard to believe.
Yes.
That this was going on when you were a young man.
Yeah.
Even and me as well. You know,
Yes.
we know you, particularly with Norman. Yeah. We know that lifestyle.
That's right.
And it is a lifestyle that has gone now. And is that a good thing? Were they happier then, do you think, Michael? Was it a great community, the mining community?
There probably was a great sense of community, and many of the traditions continue, but these things don't last forever. And as coal mines became exhausted, certainly in southwest Durham, the coal fields shifted towards the coast where the last reserves were.
Right.
And then you had the villages and the towns where mines had closed. People were either transferred to other collieries, as Norman was. He was transferred to Mainsforth Colliery at Ferryhill Station, and then back to a drift mine where the miners walk in underground rather than drop in by a cage. Some took retirement, some transferred to other collieries, and there were changing times. And even when that was over, and you were left with the shells of pit villages from the exhausted coal fields, those in making the sort of planning decisions in the county came up with a scheme during the late 60s and early 70s that they would categorise communities and whether they would be allowed to continue. If you were in a Category D classification, if your village or town was Category D, it was pulled down.
Right.
The local authorities wanted a fresh start. They didn't want to be associated with the past. And what was interesting was that Norman and others were trying to paint and draw the whole heritage issue and a social record of what was happening. And simultaneously, authors such as Sid Chaplin, who was a contemporary of Norman's at the Spennymoor settlement, and Sid also worked underground at Dean and Chapter Colliery. They were writing about it, the things that Norman was painting and drawing, and the singers were singing about it, and so on. Yeah. And so they were trying to, that group of people at that time in the 50s and 60s were trying to ensure that the past wasn't lost and wiped off the face of the earth. They tried to preserve it either in writing or painting.
And is that one of the reasons why Norman did paint? To preserve the past, to preserve his heritage, his culture, in fact.
That was his environment, and he was obviously influenced by the environment, whether it was the mining or in the pubs or the street scene in his community. But he was driven from a very early age, as a painter. There's no question of that. Even as a youngster at school, he won a little competition once in primary school. He knew his destiny at the age of 21. He made a statement, I'm going to become a professional artist and devote the whole of my life to painting and drawing. And even with his drawings, with his Flowmaster pen, we knew there were a lot of sketchbooks, but we didn't know there were 284, I think it was, that we found, spanning an entire lifetime. Yeah. And as he said, he had a drawing was like an itch to be scratched. He went everywhere with his sketch pad and did his drawings and so on. So
when he left the pit, was it a relief then to him, or was he dragged out of the pit by the wife?
Yes, it probably was a relief. I don't think Sarah didn't carry out the threat. He realised that he had to go and make a fresh start, and prepared for that by finding a property that enabled him to have a proper space for a studio.
And did he make good money in his lifetime as an artist? Because we know that it is very rare for an artist to make a very good living in their lifetime. I mean, Norman's work is worth, in some cases, many tens of thousands of pounds now.
Yes.
Did he benefit from that during his lifetime?
Yes, he made sufficient to cope with a bit to spare. Yeah. And even towards the end, they still had some reserves that enabled them to have care at home and that sort of thing before they accepted full-time residential care. So yes, he was able to make a living out of it, but it was always a precarious situation.
Well, of course it is.
Because you couldn't guarantee that people would have that interest.
And what about life with you? You're the son-in-law. Mm-hmm. You were the boyfriend in the beginning. How did he welcome you or not into the family home?
Yes, I was very welcome. There's a lovely gem of a story with people often say, well, did he never paint your portrait, Mike? Yeah. And of course the answer was no. I mean, he was a portrait artist, the family well recorded growing up in Bishop's Close Street and other private commissions. But the subject of a portrait of me never occurred until one occasion towards the end when they had full-time care at home, and one night our telephone rang at midnight. And when you get a call at midnight, there's a problem.
Yeah.
And sure enough, one of the carers said, look, Mike, Norman's not very well. He's got severe abdominal pains. What should I do? Right, I said, get him wrapped up, keep him warm, slippers on, dressing gown. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Oh, and the other point was that they couldn't get an ambulance, a doctor, or a paramedic. What
Right.
should I do?
Right.
Get him prepared. I'll pick him up and I'll run him through to the hospital at Durham.
Right.
And sure enough, I screeched to a halt, got him into the car, through to the hospital at Durham, handed over at casualty. I went to park the car. This is about 1:45 in the morning now. And I had to wait while the doctors were doing their examination. And every now and again I was allowed to go in and see him in one of the cubicles. Is everything all right, Norman? No, I'm bloody sick. Get me out of here, Michael. And this went on for ages. Each
Right.
time I went in, he expressed how dissatisfied he was. And I said, well, look, I cannot do anything. It's only the doctors who can make the decision to release you until they're satisfied that you're okay. And almost towards the end, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I went in. And I said, how are you, Norman? I'm bloody sick. Get me out of here, Michael. He said, I'll even paint your portrait.
Just to get him out.
And I said, well, it's a bit late for that now, Norman. Anyway, it was released shortly after that.
Oh,
So,
wow. And how would you describe your relationship with him over the very many years you knew him? Did you go to the pub? Did you socialise?
occasionally I'd had a pint with him. Towards the end, we would often share a bottle of brown ale together when he
Nice.
was at home.
Good traditional
And,
northern ale.
That's right. And he
Yeah.
was allowed to slip the cap off and pour the drinks.
Beautiful.
And,
Beautiful. And that will
that's it.
take him back in time.
That's right, it certainly was. So yes, we got on very well. He was always keen that his children, Anne and John, and the grandchildren should all make the most of their professions in education, because he'd been denied that.
Right, yeah.
And I think he was very proud of John and Dorothy, who both had successful careers in education. Anne was head of visual arts at a school in Spennymoor,
Yeah.
and I rose through the ranks as a deputy and then a head teacher at a secondary school.
Marvellous.
So he was
Yeah.
chuffed with that.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
And he came, Norman and Sarah came along to the ceremony. Years ago I did an MA at Durham University,
Right.
and I think
Yeah.
they were delighted to go along and be
Marvellous.
involved in that.
Did Norman quite enjoy the little bit of celebrity that he had? Because certainly he has been a very well-known character in the North. He's internationally known now,
Yes.
but you know he was very
Yes.
well known,
Yeah.
very well regarded.
Yes.
Did he quite enjoy that?
I think so. Yes, he didn't look for it.
Yeah.
But if anyone got in touch and said, could I come and talk to you?
Yeah.
And yes, he would never turn anyone down. They only had the telephone fitted in the last few years.
No.
But if all the communication was by letter, and he would always take time to write a personal letter in response. But he never declined anyone who wished to turn up. And some turned up unannounced, like the occasion where Ray Keenley's side of the Aeolian Quartet turned up one day.
Right.
And it's in the stories in the book. And
What, just out of the blue?
out of the blue, he knocked on the door. Are you not? Is Norman Cornish live here? Yes. Norman was brought down. Can I help you? He introduced himself. Could I talk to you? I'd like to buy some of your work if it's for sale. This was a time where he wasn't. He was without an attachment to a gallery in Newcastle. And before he came in, Ray Keenley's side had said, before I come in, Norman, I must get my violin out of the car. I don't like to leave it unattended. And Norman jokingly said, it's not a Stradivarius, is it? And he said, actually, it is. And declared later that he was a member of the Aeolian Quartet.
Wow.
And did an impromptu performance for Norman and Sarah in the kitchen. and bought one of his drawings. I don't know what he got. Yes.
And this all. Let's get on to the book then. I mean, this is a work of love and hardship, because it's a hell of a book.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information there, some fantastic pictures.
Yes.
This must have taken a very long time to put together.
It's based on 50 years of conversations and events, and Anne and I realised that if we didn't write them all down, they'd be lost. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. We had access to all of the images, we knew the stories. I'd been writing a blog that goes out each Monday morning. There were a lot of people following that, and we decided a couple of years ago that yes, we need to turn this into a book. We invited a number of guest writers. Nobody declined. Michael Chaplin did the prologue. Melvyn Bragg did one of the essays. Andrew Festing and a whole host of others, Norman's biographers. So there are 1,000-word essays in the book as well that see his work from a different point of view, and as I said, none of the writers declined the invitation. So it's over 400 images, a lot being published for the first time, particularly the commissions and the family portraits and other portraits.
And finally, tell us about the exhibition at the Bowes Museum, because this is quite a big thing. It's quite a coup, isn't it?
It is. We had the centenary. I'll go back to the centenary year. There were 6 exhibitions across the region, including a major retrospective at the Bowes Museum. They had record attendance of something like 58,000 people travelled from all over the UK to look at the exhibition. Never mind what the so-called experts in London think is good art. People voted with their feet. It was a democratic process. People know what they enjoy. So that was a huge success. But then a year or so later, we were approached by one of the trustees at the Bowes Museum. What about a Norman Cornish L.S. Lowry exhibition?
L.S. Lowry, now where's the connection there?
The connection is that they were well known to each other. They first exhibited together in 1951 at Tully House in Carlisle, and thereafter on another 6 occasions, either in London or in the northeast at the Stone Gallery in Newcastle. So they were known to each other, and Norman was invited to become involved with the Stone Gallery in 1959. They wanted to manage his work and exhibitions and promote his work. And then a few years later, Lowry appeared. He'd met the owners of the gallery, Mick and Tilly Marshall, at an exhibition in Harrogate, and wandered in unannounced one day and said, I'd like to be working with you, and they took him on board. So he was part of the group of artists there, including Sheila Fell and others. So they knew each other from the early 60s right through until Lowry passed away in 1976.
And did they maintain a friendship?
Yes, Lowry didn't like to talk about art, but yes, they were known to each other. They weren't best buddies, you know, they were visiting each other at home and that sort of thing. But there was a mutual respect, and Lowry did buy 2 of Norman's pictures. Nice. One was a gantry, and the other one we don't know. And in Tilly Marshall's book, she refers to Norman as the only artist Lowry was jealous of.
Oh, wow.
Which is quite a big statement.
It's quite an accolade, isn't it?
It certainly is, yes.
Did Norman buy any Lowrys?
No, but he did a lovely little drawing of him on one occasion, and we don't know who's got it. We have a copy of it. It was acquired by W.E. Johnson, who was the art critic for The Guardian and the Northern Echo. And he got it, but we've been unable to trace it. But it's in the book.
The 2 great men have now joined forces again at the Bowes. So when is the exhibition?
The exhibition opens on July the 20th. It's called Kith and Kinship. A representation of the works of Norman Cornish and L.S. Lowry come together again. Works have been pulled in from all over the private collections all over the country, and It runs for 6 months until January the 20th, 2025. There are 27 works from Norman Cornish. Some haven't had a viewing for many years or not at all. And likewise, there are some by Lowry that have rarely been seen, and one in particular being seen for the first time.
Now, is this something that you and Anne are particularly looking forward to?
We'll be glad when it's started.
Has it been a lot of work?
It has been a lot of work.
Can imagine,
yes.
But
It's dominated our lives for the last 3 years.
I bet it has, and I know the book has, because I know a mutual friend who has put the book together with you for
Tim
you.
Bates.
Tim, he's absolutely
done a
brilliant.
marvellous job.
A fantastic job, and that's the connection here. And I know Anne is in the building, but she doesn't like to appear on camera.
Right.
But how's she feeling? When the exhibition kicks off at the Bowes Museum, I mean, one of the finest museums in the world.
That's right.
We're very fortunate to have it here in County Durham. It must. I'm expecting great emotions. It will be a very emotional thing for the daughter of Norman Cornish to see his work in one of the greatest museums in the world, with one of the other greatest artists from the 20th century.
That's an interesting angle on it. I mean, we haven't considered that, but when Anne was a student at Sunderland Art College in the late 60s and early 70s, she actually did her thesis on Lowry.
No.
A lonely man painting loneliness. It's unpublished. We'll probably put it on the website at some point. But that was a very interesting starting point with the discussions with the Lowry.
Well, I think it'll be a relief to you, and I think it'll be very exciting, and I will certainly come along to the exhibition, and I can't wait. Mike, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.